Hey, everybody, welcome. It is another Friday, which means it's another Friday morning with these two pretty mugs between me and Dwarin for another episode of the Business Unscripted podcast, where we're going to share some stories, some advice, some insights on things that are going to help you with your business, or maybe you're just starting a business. Maybe it hopefully gives you that little kick in the butt to get started, get moving. It's things that we've learned through our experiences, but also helped our own clients work on and improve as well. So welcome to another Friday. Grab your cup of Joe and let's jump into the show. All right, Dwarin, how are you, buddy? How was your week?
It was a good week. It was a good week. Lots of things happening. Very busy. Lots of positives, and
Yeah,
it was just a good week. It was a good week. I had a good week.
I gotta know because we missed the update last week. But how's baby doing?
Baby's doing great.
Baby's
Uh,
doing wonderful.
Sleeping a little bit more during the night,
Okay.
although my poor wife isn't getting as much sleep as she should be getting.
Oh
She's
no, why is the baby up all the time, or she
uh
just can't sleep?
we got super lucky with little Autumn, who was 11 and a half months behind little baby Anna now. So she was a really quiet baby, just like really chill, didn't really cry very much, drank, ate, slept a lot. Little baby Anna just likes a little bit more attention from mum. So,
Right.
as soon as mum tries to put it down, eyes wide open. Oh, what's going on? Why are you putting me down? Isn't it playtime? So it's just poor mum is on high alert. So, and we had a meeting early this morning, so she had to be up for that. So she normally should have been getting some bit of daytime sleep, but
Okay.
she didn't get any today. So she's actually sitting off to the side in the office here, processing a bunch of employee information for some new starts for next week.
Nice. Well, Paige, I hope you get some rest. Kick Dwarn in the butt once time or two. Tell Dwarn to get up and take care of that baby.
There's a little thing though, there's part of the feeding process that I can't help with, so I
Oh,
kind of have
that
to
part.
take her
Yeah,
up on it. Yeah,
you
and
definitely can't do anything about that part. That's for sure. So,
yeah.
but well, good to hear things are going well, Paige. We're always thinking about you. Hope you get some rest here. But so Dwarn, I know we were talking pre-show and also earlier in the week. Um, you know about profitability. Something that we've talked about in prior episodes. We've talked about knowing profitability not only by like service line, but profitability by client sometimes can actually be important to know. And based on our conversations, you went back and you did some research on your own work and your own clientele. So why don't you give us a story? What kind of prompted you, and then what did you find out?
Well, Dave, you prompted me because we talk far too often about this, and I had the realization at some point that I couldn't answer a couple of questions in relation to. So we do a lot of staffing, outsourced staffing solutions,
Right.
and we've got some legacy clients that have been around for 10, 12 years, and there's some great clients of ours, and we've got staff that have been with them for like probably 9 years now.
Okay.
So what's happened is over the years, we've passed along bonuses and we've passed along increases from the client, but we never really went back and evaluated how much those staff members really cost. Because, we were making a little bit of money in the beginning, and at some point along the line, we just kept adding to it. Well, we had to do something. Prompted me when we had our conversation. There was also a little something locally prompted me that they had a change in legislation on a couple of the ways payments are worked out, etc., for staffing. So I decided to build a nice little algorithm, turn it into a formula, put it through
Right.
spreadsheet, manipulated that a whole bunch of times as we do. And we basically broke down every single staff member, how much we were paying based on whatever we felt their salary was, then what the real cost of that person was with all of their inclusions and costs and contributions and taxes and all that sort of wonderful stuff. So the
Right.
real cost. That was surprising in itself, just to see the real cost, because I'd only ever seen lump sum values in other spreadsheets. So I kind of hadn't associated with an individual staff member previously. It was kind of like a, oh, I should have been doing this a long time ago. Why wasn't I? Moment.
Right.
And this was prompted to, how granular we had been talking about, you should be getting with your cash flow and your reporting and understanding. So I decided to go through this process, and I did it for all my staff. And what I came up with was the majority of my staff, I was doing okay. And I'd basically worked out, I knew what I wanted my minimum percentage for profitability to be, because obviously for every staff member you've got to have back-end resources to back them up as well. And that wasn't in my inclusions. That's like just another formula somewhere else that we work out. But this, I decided to add in what we charge the customer for each of these outsourced staffing resources and our staff, as well as put in what the percentage of profitability is,
Right.
and the value of the profitability. Well, it was pretty scary when I did that on at least one staff member, who ironically happened to be one of the oldest staff members in the team. And we actually realized that depending on the fluctuating dollar at the time, that particular staff member could be as low as less than 3% profitability.
Wow.
And it was like,
and here you thought you were probably making a decent profitability on them because they had been here so long.
Exactly. Like, I'm like, yeah. And I realized, I'm barely covering costs. So if there's and we're talking like 3%, that could be picked up with a shift in the dollar. We've seen a shift in the dollar. So, like, a good example, when we first put him on, the Aussie dollar was sitting at about 44 peso to the dollar, whereas nowadays it's about 36. But I've seen that drop as low as 31. So realistically, if I look at the maths, at points in the past, I would have probably been losing money on that employee by having him on the team, just purely because it was a complete oversight. And I couldn't understand how I'd gotten here. And I went back and worked it all through. And what I'd realized was, because we had actually added on bonuses and then passed them directly through to the staff member, they had just increased over time. So he was on like 3 or 4 times what he'd started his salary at, over the last 9-10 years, which sounds like a hell of a lot. But I mean, we're talking about, the Philippines and, learning the role and progressing through the role. And
I was going to say what's simple that people can apply to their own business, right? And kind of what you did is you just took a look at individual, in this case, charges by client, and you took, what is the cost? What am I charging my client? What is it costing me? Right? Which gives you a net number. So let's say, for example, you were charging $2,000. This individual, you have to pay out between taxes and payroll and everything else, $1,900. So it leaves you with a profitability of $100, where you might be thinking that you were getting $400 or $500 because that's what you were getting at the beginning of that individual, not adding up all the extra costs, right? So maybe at the beginning you were charging $1,500 and he only cost you $1,000. Your profitability is 33%. And if you set it and forget it, which it sounds like this might have been something that happened in your case, you may think I'm always going to get 33%, but in your case, if you added $400 of bonuses, right, to his salary, but then you didn't increase that 400 by the 33% profit margin, just 1-to-1 directly added it to the client,
which is what we did.
You now become, let's say $1,400 in charges, and you're only charging, $1,500 or whatever it ends up being, right? And you ate it. And so those costs, like you just found out, can be picked up, and your profitability, as you said, goes from 20% maybe down to 3%. So you as a listener, go through your charges, your services by client. What are you charging the client? What costs are associated with that? So how many hours are you spending with that client? If you have like Dwarin here in our case had direct salaries and expenses to that client, check it out. Because if you get year over year expense increases, everybody does, right? Whether you're doing salary increases for bonuses, or you're doing salary increases for cost of living, your expenses from vendors are probably going to go up as well. And if you're still charging the same dollar amount, your profit margin is not the same as it was when you first started. And so you have to essentially be increasing your prices appropriately, or you find 4, 5, 6, 7 years down the road that your profitability is, to crap. So go back, and that would be kind of your challenge this week would be to go through and look at your charges and your profitability by client or by service. Let's say you have tens of hundreds of clients in one service. Look at your profitability by service, and you can add all that up and determine that. But I was going to ask, Warren, so what was, you make this determination that your net profit for this client is pretty crappy. Where did you go with it? How did you take it to address that?
Well, just before we get there, something you just raised there was interesting is one of the things that you tend to forget when you're actually going through and giving increases and charging your clients for an increase and passing those across in our instance, or a performance bonus increase, just as you do as staff have been with you for a while, right, is you do have additional costs in there. Like we've got Google Business Suite costs. Now they have gone up 40% since, in the last 3 years, which was never factored into my costing of that particular individual. There's putting on managers and hiring managers to actually help manage those teams. Those managers, their base salaries plus increases over time as well. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff, which it's really hard to factor that in. So typically what I've done is I basically worked on, I need this minimum to maintain margin now, because that fact is at least a portion of all of that other stuff that's necessary to keep that person working and employed as well.
Well, and you make a good point too. So, and this is important, especially if you're a smaller business owner, or you're just getting started in terms of developing your service. You have to be thinking forward state. Like, for example, we're rolling out our new cash flow clarity program, and I'm not pricing it based on like me doing the work, right? Because if it was me doing the work, the cost would be a lot less and the profit margin would be a lot more. But I'm pricing it based off of future state, which is when staff are doing the work. And so what do you need to price it at now for you to be able to, when you get your first 5, 6, 7 clients, to bring in that first staff member and it still be profitable, right? That's where you have to be thinking, and for your case, Dwarin, what future costs do I have to build in, right? In terms of the initial charges that cover everything. So what is that, sort of bulk of services that you have that every virtual employee has to subscribe to? Boom.
Yeah.
So you bring on a salary, you add those costs, and then you add your profit margin on top of that, right?
100%.
And so the managers, and then when you're thinking too, like you brought up another one, managers. So now you have to look at, okay, within my profit margin, do I have enough? So for example, and this is high level, so this is just kind of if you forecast out that for every 5 employees, you have to have 1 manager, right? Or that's when you need to start a manager after 5 employees, and then that manager can manage up to 15. Does the 5 at least cover the minimum expenses of the manager? So that way, when you add the other 10, that manager is still being covered, and the 5 are still being profitable. So, for example, let's say a manager, this is just high level, is going to cost you $1,000 a month. Okay. Those first 5, when you go to hire them, should at least have $200 of profit between them, right? Each, so that they're covering the cost of that manager. The business as a whole may not make money for a little bit until they start growing, so they keep growing, but at least you've got your staff covered and all your expenses covered. And if you want to make some money, maybe each one of them, your goal is to have $300 in profit each. So that way, when you get to 5 and you hire the manager, at least you're still making $100 each, right? Temporarily, until you grow, right? You're always gonna take a short-term hit in business when you expand a little bit. So that first quarter of hitch when you hire the new employee, is when you're gonna take the downfall, but then you're gonna go back up. And so you plan it out, you forecast it out. This is things that with our, as we mentioned, cash flow clarity program, we help you kind of do. We project out the next 12 to 18 months and the impact of these potential changes, loans, anything like that. So in your case, Dwarin, you mentioned managers. Always make sure that you're kind of projecting out the number of employees the minimum, when do I need to make a change? And then the maximum, like what can they handle? And look at the profitability at both. Like what's the profitability when I first make that hire? And what's the profitability when they're at their max capacity? Those two things are really going to help you understand and make the right decision moving forward.
100%. And the other thing is, like, one thing that's really hard to factor in and you don't think about initially is things like rent increases, power increases, all of these sort of things, in different software increases that you need to add in, different tools you need to add on. All this sort of stuff has to be factored into the scenario. So what I've basically done is, where previously I might have said, hey, look, I'm happy with X amount of margin. I've now doubled that margin that I'm happy with, so that I can go, well, you know what? I've got a holy shit, something is necessary that I didn't even think of. It's there. I'm still sitting above my base that I need to be for that margin to make this worthwhile and not stress me out. I got really lucky in this instance because I've got a very good relationship with this client. I went back and had a conversation with the client later that day after realizing this, and simply pointed out that one of the 5 staff that they have with me was sitting at a very, very low margin, and advising him, because we were about to do another pay increase, that I might need to charge him a little extra on the pay increase just to cover that new, at least percentage of what I was going to do. But I mean, I was thinking a minimal increase of maybe 1.5% or something like that on top of the current 3, so it was not going to cost me any additional money for that increase I was about to put on. Well, the client volunteered at that point. He said, well, we can't have this. And he actually threw another 10% on the kitty and said, look, bill me out an additional 10% on what you get. So he's now sitting on about a 12.5 to 13% margin on that particular staff member, which for me is a blessing. And it goes to show that just because you find something out that's not necessarily great news, don't feel like it's something that you need to, just be straightforward and honest with, your clients and the people around you. I didn't go into that conversation expecting anything. I just went in to inform, and I walked out with something which was absolutely incredible.
And so this is also something to consider when you're talking price increases. How do you do it appropriately? All of that, right? In this case, you had a great relationship with the client, so you were able to kind of be open. You were able to be honest with what you found out, and went straight forward to him. And you didn't do it where you went straight forward to him and said, hey, I need to increase your price because I need to make more money, right? You just kind of pointed out, hey, just letting you know, being straightforward, we're about to do this price increase. It's going to be a little bit higher as we look to adjust our margins because we happen to find out that this one was not at our target margin, right? And just letting you know and being upfront. It wasn't something that you did, unexpectedly. And that's the first thing, is you want to make sure whenever you're doing price increases that you do it with clarity and transparency to your clients. And there's one of ways that you could do it is direct, which is what you just did, right? You go right, especially if your service, your business is one-on-one with the person, right? You're having a conversation directly with them on a regular basis. That's where you want to have a phone call, maybe a virtual meeting, depending on if you guys are close or not. Then you want to actually directly communicate to them. If your business is more like hands-off, so maybe you're a service provider, or maybe like you're a landscaper and you don't really see your clients, but you're there, that's where like maybe an email or a notice, right, on the door could be more appropriate. Or just letting effective XYZ date, whatever you end up picking, you want to give at least a 30-day notice typically. If it's a larger increase, you want to give more like a 60 to 90-day notice. But just letting them know, hey, just effective, let's say September 1st, we're making a 10% price increases to all of our invoice to cover increased costs.
Yeah.
And that's the third part. Make sure that there's a real reason why you're doing it and explain that to your client or your customer. Don't just say we're increasing prices 10%. Like that's going to turn them off. But if you say we need to increase prices 10% to offset price, increase in gas costs, increase in, expenses or supply costs, they're going to understand that because there's a legitimate reason.
Vendor costs have just gone up due to tariffs or something like that, right? There's going to be, if you've got legitimate reasons, but yeah, definitely. If you go in and say, hey, I really want to buy that new Ford Bronco, so I need to lift your prices up a little bit. They're going to sit there and go, well, Do you really need that? Or if you do, why don't you go and get another customer to do that? But no, like you're right. I think just having that conversation really helps, and putting it out. And another thing that I think is good to do too is work out a staged plan to get someone where they need to be. So I've seen this with the managed service industry before, where clients are basically they've been on a legacy plan. It was signed for a 3-year agreement. Changes have come in, different compliance levels and stuff, which now need to be factored into their solution. And
Right.
yes, it was technically out of the scope initially, but the wording was vague, so they needed to include it, because they want to provide a good service and an inclusive service. But when it comes time for renewal, it gets a little scary because the price is suddenly 70-80% higher than before, but they're getting all this amazing service. But as far as they're concerned, I'm getting the same sort of service before. So what the clients have done is said, hey, look, so for the next 6 months, we're going to increase it by this much. And then for the next 6 months, it'll be increased by this much. And then that'll maintain for the next year. And then we'll increase it by this much for the last year. And it was a little bit easier pill to swallow. And they explained it by telling them what the increase was about. And the clients were like, well, you know what? We can work with you on that. We can get that in the budget. We can work with the budget to make sure that it's inclusive for that. It's not always a straight road, right? Sometimes some clients are just going to tell you to bugger off. I don't want to do it. And I've heard that before a bunch of times too.
And that's fine, because you're probably losing money on those clients, right? Or their margins are small anyways. It's taking up a lot of your time and their margin's small. Well, take that time and attention and go to a client where you can charge the appropriate amount and get your margin back. Like, sometimes loss is actually a gain, especially for the people that aren't profitable or who are maybe taking up too much of your time in association with the amount that you're getting off of them or that they're paying. So sometimes it's worth it to just cut your losses at that point.
Absolutely. I worked for a company, it would have been probably 18 years, 20 years ago. And I'm feeling old now. So while I was working for them, and one of the things that they were telling me is they had this really great account that they had before I came on. I'm like, oh, that sounds incredible. That must have been so profitable. It must have been really good, lots of business. And they're like, well, yeah, we did get lots of business, but it came with conditions. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, we had 8 new staff members working in the warehouse to pack and send their goods out on top of the team of 2 that we have right now. So we had 10 staff down there. 8 of them are dedicated just to this one client. Now, this client wanted restocking fees in the event that the pricing changed within 60 days of their purchase price. They wanted guarantees that they could actually get updated pricing credits every time there was a change. Now, we're talking about a company that at the time was selling cabling and USB thumb drives. Now, USB thumb drives at the time, it was the craze. We'd just gone from 128 meg to 256 meg, 512 meg. So it was that sort of era. So the pricing was fluctuating so quickly and rapidly at that time. And what they found is they were stuck having to maintain this. Slow-moving stock also had the ability to, that they couldn't sell in stores. The clauses were written, they could send it back. So,
yeah, so I mean, and that's difficult, right? Because what you're trying to do is now you're trying to build a business model on unknown future price changes, and you can't do that.
No, and this is what happened. So what happened was the clients were, every time they had a new model out, they'd get really stressed out because they'd have to drop the price on the old model to clear the stock. But they had to be careful because there might be 10,000 units in stock, but there could be 30,000 units sitting out there with this one particular reseller partner of theirs in all their retail outlets across the country. So they would have to factor it in. So it became all this work for admin, all this work for processing, because back then, every order would come in on the fax and have to be manually entered into the system. All this packing, all of the shipping and stuff. And because of the arrangement, there was a discounted rate on shipping because, they were shipping so much of it, of course. So it basically worked out that they weren't making very much at all after evaluating after a relationship for 2 years. So they made the decision to drop that customer. And whilst on paper it looked like they had lost a huge chunk of their business, they actually gained a huge amount of profit because they were able to go through a retrenchment process, remove staff that were no longer necessary to the operation, but also reduce a whole bunch of stress and overhead and, for cash flow projections and stock projections. And it was just a lot easier for them to run their business, and they were able to focus better on making money, which was pretty cool to, kind of me 20 years ago to hear about this was like, wow, that's really incredible. I'd never heard of this sort of thing. Like, I would have assumed a big customer like that makes you lots of money. But the reality is big customers rarely make you a lot of money.
Depending on their terms, right? If they're too big, right? It's one of those things where, and I've run into this with a couple other clients. As small business owners, they get to these bigger companies who request, like, they think are common, kind of terms and conditions, but in reality, they're terms and conditions that they're only given to these small business owners because they know that the small business owners need to take it, right? Or they'll go find somebody else. And so some of these things are, like refusing to pay invoices for 45 days. Like, oh, our invoice payments 45-day terms, like, so we're only going to pay you, in that case. So you got these small business companies that are out here fronting tens of thousands of dollars for these big companies, right, in payroll and supplies, when typically, a bigger company would say, you have to pay us X amount up front, X amount at this milestone A, milestone B, milestone C, and the remainder due at the end, right? That's why a lot of bigger companies will go to small business owners, because they feel like they can give them terms and conditions that bigger companies won't.
It's kind of
Hold
bullying, right? Like one of the big ones I see is we're going to pay you 90 days after 90 days after invoice. And I've seen this with a lot of companies, and they're selling products that are like maybe 6 to 12% margins. So it's not even like there's massive margins in this. And when you take into consideration 90 days, that's 3 months. And it's after you've invoiced. So you might have already got the purchase order, shipped the goods, and then invoiced. There could be a delay of 2 weeks for the shipping before you get it. It gets very, very disconcerting for a business owner when you see things like that. And I've witnessed this plenty of times where small businesses are fronting 2 to 3 months worth of cash flow for other businesses to provide. And then it's really bad is when those big companies or those even small companies you're doing it for, they go into administration. And then you're left holding a bill that's never going to get paid, or you're going to get paid cents on the dollar. And that can really affect a lot of business.
And so for administration, that's like default, right? That's bankruptcy over here.
That's right. Bankruptcy for those in the US and in Australia, we call it administration. So, and look, I've had a friend who's had that happen, and his business basically had to go into bankruptcy due to, clients who took receivership of, I think it was like $40,000 worth of servers at the time, back when you used to do physical servers on site. And they failed to disclose that they were actually financially insolvent. And 2 months later, when he was chasing the bill to get paid that hadn't been paid, he's getting told, sorry, but we've got administrators in here now. You're going to have to deal with these guys and put your bid in to try and get paid. And I think he ended up getting paid like 30 cents on the dollar. Here's the problem. He has to go back to vendors and pay the vendors for the services if he hasn't already paid the services.
Right.
If he's
paid for them. Yeah, he probably paid
exactly. If he's paid for them, then
he's out of money.
Not earning while the money's out there. And he's also he's never going to get that money back. So that's a huge loss to a lot of businesses. And that's something I think a lot of businesses need to be aware that you're the business owner, you're the business. Set your own terms. And if the terms are not met, then
we're not saying you can't negotiate.
Point,
right.
But you've got to make sure that the terms are suitable. So with myself, for example, we learned a long time ago in the services industry, we bill for the month that is. So we bill at the beginning of the month for the month that is. We give 7-day terms for the majority of our clients, and they get 7 days to pay the invoice for the month that is, which means that we're probably only ever going to be out 20 days worth of invoice at worst case if they pay on time.
Right.
If they don't pay on time, then, and we've still got that month to go in and get it, but we're not chasing them after we've delivered a service.
Yeah, I would definitely, like, for any business, try to set your terms at like 15, right? 10, 15 days out, and invoice every 7 days, and in the US, you can
wait till
do
the end of the
things,
month.
right? Yeah. Don't wait till the end of the month, and try to, space out if you're a service-based business, try to space out your due dates right throughout the month. So you always have cash flow coming in. But always make sure that if you're on that retainer type program, that bills are paid on time. Like you're not saying, hey, here's your, and have them pay for the month ahead of time. Just like so if they're paying for the first for that whole month that's coming up. Not, hey, I'm going to pay you on July 1st for the work that you did in June. Like that's not going to work, because what happens when that July 1st invoice doesn't get paid for your prior work? Well, now you're in trouble. So always make sure that you're invoicing for the period ahead, not in arrears.
Especially when you're in a situation where you're paying for staffing and resources and material to do the job. Mm-hmm. So for me, my advice would be anyone who's offering any sort of services that require an upfront purchase, invoice for the service, for the purchase of the equipment upfront when you're trying to make the order, and basically set a number internally that if it's less than this number, we don't require payment upfront. If it is over this number, we require at least 50% upfront to place the order for you. And then once it's delivered, we require the complete payment, or at the end of your term, for example. The labor component, you can wear it a little bit more. You can be a little bit more flexible with it. But when it comes to real physical products, like one of my clients in Australia is an MSP, he'll get an order for 5 laptops. That's 10 grand right there that he has to go out in front. So before he even places that order, he sends the invoice across, gets it approved, gets it paid, then he places the order with the supplier. So it's just, I think it all comes down to, how you set up your business. But if you are going to be that business that gives 30 days payment periods, then that gives you the flexibility to charge a higher price. You don't have to be the cheapest at that point. You can add that extra 5% margin, for example, to cover the fact that you're not going to be making that interest in the bank account, that it's going to take, you're going to have to send out and have a delayed payment coming in, that you might have to pay interest because you put it on your credit card to make the payment to the actual, for the purchase. So you've got to have that, you've got to understand, this is where what your work, the stuff you've been talking about with me about the cash flow, understanding your cash flow, understanding where your money's coming from, when it's coming, it's becoming evidently more and more important in business, because those who don't know are destined to fail. Whether it's today, tomorrow, or sometime in the future, they're destined to fail, because you need to understand where the money is and where it's coming in, because then you can make better decisions as to how to get more of that money coming in.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the idea, right, is that if you're not projecting into the future, you're only relying on information right now. And the idea is that when you project, it's not, again, like your profit margin. You're not setting it and forgetting it. It's a moving, flowing document with, hey, how did we, do we hit our goal, right, from what we projected? And so you want to have like KPIs off of this. You want to have, budget versus actuals off of your cash flow projection. But then also, how do different scenarios come into play within that projection? How can, what can we do, right? Do we need to cut costs by X amount of percent in the next 4 months? If we do that, what does that look like? How does that impact our cash flow? Because what you may find is that, cutting costs isn't going to cut your way out of the business, right? Because you can only cut so much, especially if it's, not related to client service. What you may have to go back, as you found, and you may have to look at your pricing. Maybe your pricing's too low. and you need, maybe in 2 months you need to do a price increase to your clients, and maybe that solves you for the next 6 months, and then you focus on growth, adding new clients in.
Well,
There's
funny you
so
should
many
say that.
different, there's so many different things that can play into play here
Well,
when it comes to projecting, but you have to do it.
you do, and even to the point where, like, I had a situation just end of last week. I'd been sending out notification for a client that was 2 months behind in payments for hosting and email services, which we'd fronted the cost for and paid for initially.
Right.
And what happened was we suspended the services because we had no communication coming back from them. We'd warned them that it was going to happen. We just suspended the services, notified them of the suspension, and then suddenly, oh, we need our services. Please turn them back on. It's like, sure, as soon as you pay the outstanding 2 months and bring your account up to date for this month, and we're going to require you to pay a month in advance moving forward, and so that we don't have to chase you consistently, because this has become habitual with you, and we've had to do this for every month, for however many months, like 2 years or something. It's become a big deal. So they came back, we negotiated, we agreed if they paid the 2 months outstanding, we'd give them a 15-day grace, we turn the services back on, and we'll revisit the matter in 7 days from now, as it says. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They offered to pay by credit card. Now, this particular business that we have doesn't, that part of the business doesn't accept credit card. So we said, look, you can pay cash, you can pay via check, because they're local Philippine-based businesses, or you can pay via PayPal or bank transfer. Which would you prefer? Oh, we'll do it by PayPal. I said, well, okay. Well, you're going to have to pay the penalty. You're going to have to pay a penalty, which is the fee that it costs us to receive that payment from PayPal. We're going to pass that along to you. So that's going to be added to your outstanding invoice. Because our invoices were based on you paying via cash or check or local bank transfer. Well, as it turns out, they used a Canadian-based credit card to make the payment on PayPal, and it came with a fairly hefty fee from PayPal, which ate into, I think, about 5% of the total payment when it finally came through. So my advice to people would be, one of the things that you need to understand when you're doing your cash flow, when you're doing all of these pricing models, is you need to understand different payment methods cost different amounts. If you're working on a low margin business and you're losing 3 to 5% every time someone pays you with a credit card because you're a payment processor, or they're paying you with PayPal, or they're paying with some other platform, then what you need to do is factor that into your costing. You need to factor that into a cost of business, or add a fee where your client's willing to pay that, as part of your service that you're offering. But if you haven't factored that in and your client is paying you, I think we talked about it previously, Dave, in another episode, incentivize them to pay you on time and through certain channels. If they do a bank transfer where you're paying no fees by the way they pay you,
give them a 1% discount.
Give them a discount. Make them feel good about it. There's ways around it, but that was a great example.
Like the other way is you can give them, I think, if you're trying to increase timing, right, and it's maybe an ACH with no fee, and they pay within 10 days, you can give them a 1 or a 2% discount. That's kind of a typical term, called a 110 or a 210. And the other one would be, a lot of places now actually are charging the credit card fee to their clients. And I would, you definitely suggest, you could definitely do that as well. Or say, instead of having them pay it through the credit card company, like when they pay the invoice, maybe just say, like, a credit card invoice, will have an extra 1.5% fee added to it, right? Maybe it may not cover the whole thing, but it's a 1.5, a 50% increase in your reduction in your expenses, right? So if you're paying 3% and you charge them 1.5%, well, you just decrease your credit card expenses 50%, right? Which could have a big impact in your bottom line, depending on what your actual margins are. So
Well, you just add
finding ways to do that.
1.5% profit margins to your business for an entire year by doing that. And what you've got to remember is people will pay with whatever's convenient for them in most cases. So if credit card is convenient for them because they get their interest-free period, or the funds are sitting over there, or they get their frequent flyer points, or whatever those reasons behind them using that method,
Right.
it doesn't mean you need to be guilted in or feel like it's your problem to accept that payment and take the penalty or the cost of doing business in that payment method technology. Instead, feel free to pass it along. Feel free to say, yes, you can do that. There was a computer wholesale company in Australia that was extremely popular. We're talking about you turn up and there'd be people lined up 10, 15, 20 deep every hour of the day. It was always super busy, and they had like 5 outlets.
Right.
And they had really cheap computing equipment. It was retail, but to the public, but it was wholesale pricing. And you'd go in, and if you didn't have cash, like physical cash to pay for it, what would happen is you'd get hit with a 2.9% surcharge. And they'd say, no worries, here's your total bill. How are you paying for it? Oh, okay, there's a 2.9% surcharge. Are you okay with that? You're at the checkout. You're about to make the payment. It's like, what am I going to do? I got to run out, jump in the car, drive to an ATM, pull the money out, come back. No, I'm just going to pay it. I'll wear it. Next time I come in, I'm going to bring cash. Of course, you never do. You always turn up. You always face the same situation. It's like,
well, the other thing you could do there too, like those places, if you are like a brick and mortar, like, put an ATM.
Well, that's it.
And then, but the funny part is, the funny part about that is too, is like it's funny because they'll go to an ATM, they'll pay like $6, $7 to get their money out.
Yeah,
they'll take $100 out. That's 7%, right? If you take $100 out and they charge you $6, that's 6%. But you didn't want to pay the 2% to the vendor. It probably was less money. So
I mean, you've got to, and look, I mean, you've got to do. There's convenience, there's saving money. There's so many factors that come into this, but you're right. I mean, there is so many options here, but it's funny because when I look at this, like I had a situation just the other day where the ATM machine was down. So I couldn't pay with my debit card. And I'm like, well, that's a bit frustrating.
Right.
And they said, sir, just go outside and withdraw from the ATM and you can pay with cash. And I'm like, but I'm here now. I just want to do the transaction. And I'm like, you know what? Can I just jump on your website and make the purchase and do a pickup? And they're like, oh, let me check with the manager. Came back. Sir, you could, but unfortunately, the way our internal systems work, if you order on the website, they will allocate the stock from Manila and then ship it to us in our monthly shipment. So it's a 25-day delay. And I'm like, well, you can pick up my what? But I'm looking at the item right now. You've already got the box sitting in front of me. Yes, sir. So I was forced in that situation due to a technical issue that they were suffering from and a process issue they were suffering from to be inconvenienced to go out and get an ATM, withdraw the money, and then bring it back and pay for it. It is what it is. But people will do whatever's, for me, I wanted to walk out with that item. The convenience for me was be inconvenienced a little bit by using the ATM and withdrawing and then coming back and paying cash. Right. But I got to walk out with the convenience of taking the item with me that day. So your clients may surprise you. I remember there was one situation. We had one guy that worked for us in a camping store in Sydney many, many years ago. And I used to watch him, and customers would we had a process where there was no surcharge on Visa and MasterCard, but there was a surcharge of 3.2% or something if using an Amex or a Diners card. He would sit there, he would scan the card, but he would do it, and he would go, oh, I'm so sorry, it's not working. I'll try it one more time. Oh, it's not working. Do you have another card? Whenever it was a Diners or an Amex. And I watched him do this for half a day. And I'm watching, and I could see he was actually swiping it backwards every time. And when I questioned him, he goes, oh, the amount of people who get so angry at me because their Diners or Amex doesn't work here in Australia is almost no one, because they just expect it's not going to work. It's just for some reason, everyone's got this expectation. And that was like 20 years ago back in Australia when it was, fairly new. He said, but if I was just to say, look, there's a service charge for doing this, but if you give me an Amex or a Visa, there's none. they'll yell at me and they'll blame me for it. He said, so I learnt this a long time ago. I just do this little technique. They hand me over a Master or a Visa because they've always got one to go with their MasterCard or their Diners. And then I put the transaction through and it's no problem. Never get a customer yelling at me because, I want to charge them a surcharge. And I'm like, what? Very deceptive, but that was his technique for doing it in relation to the company had put in a surcharge. He didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of the client telling the customer. So he found a way around it. And the customers were like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever. Here's another card. Pay with this instead. So, I mean, there's all these different stories and ways. And I think as a bricks and mortar, just find your own way. But people will generally do whatever's more convenient from them. What makes sense to us about, if it doesn't make sense to you to add on, or you think you're going to get a lot of kickback from customers by adding on a 2.3 or a 1.5% surcharge for transactional fees to help you offset your transactional fees, you probably find most customers, if you just say, hey, look, there's a 3% transactional fee that we have to pay, we actually are passing on 1.5% of that to you as the customer. Are you okay with that?
Right.
Oh, yeah. If you're not okay with it, no worries. We just have to ask you to pay with cash.
And if not, yeah, so.
Exactly. And most of them are just going to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay, I get it. All right, we'll do it. Because most people are not that unreasonable. But I think as a business owners, we're a little bit skeptical. We don't like to push against business and try and change the terms in case we lose the business. We don't want to try it, and we feel like adding a surcharge at the time of checkout or payment might be a way of losing that business, because it's another level of negotiation we have to go through with the customer before we can finalize that sale.
Yep.
So yeah.
So and I think there was, and I know we talked about, there was one other thing that you wanted to kind of talk about today, right? So we talked a little bit.
Well,
so far we've talked about, understanding your pricing, understanding your profitability by client, right? By person, by service line, whatever it may be, because you may find that your profitability is off, right? We talked about the importance of cash flow projecting and building out scenarios for your future. But there's one other thing, a little off topic. So, those are important things as well. So if you're interested in putting profit, projections, cash flow monitoring in your business, comment down below Clarity. We'll share some information with you about our new cash flow Clarity program that'll help you not only, build out your projection, but also monitor it on a weekly basis and be able to build out some of these scenarios that we've talked about that were so important to Dwarin's business and even business owners of mine and clients of mine as well. So, but Dwarin, off topic, I think something else was kind of interesting that you kind of ran into. So why don't you share us about that as well?
Just me nerding out again. Totally. In the last 24 hours, as many people are probably aware, OpenAI came out with an announcement that GPT-5 was officially launched. And they did something very interesting. They put it forward for all users of free, plus, and pro accounts. So everybody, even with a free account, will be able to use now GPT-5. Nice. Now, for those who are not sure what I'm talking about, what I'm referring to is we were currently using GPT-4, and a lot of people were getting GPT-4, 4.5, 3, 4 mini. There was a variety of different options of these different what do you call them? It's just different variations that have of the ChatGPT platform to do different things, like analyze documents, to go through and look at images and grab all the content out of it and understand it, to write really good content for you. All of these sort of things that we've talked about in the past. You'd normally have to know as a user which one to choose. Well, one of the big things that was part of the announcement that I was watching earlier today, before I went in and started playing, was GPT-5 is the only option you have now. It automatically selects the best use case for you.
Really?
It does. And it's rather interesting because You don't have to go in and choose manually what you want to do. You just tell it what you want to do.
Yeah.
And it's a more...
I'm in here now, and like
Yeah,
before, we were talking about, you said the 4.0, the 5.0, or sorry, the 4.0, the 4 Lite, the 4 Mini. Now it just says ChatGPT-5 flagship model, and then the other models are GPT-5's thinking, which gets more thorough answers. So maybe it's something where
that's on
maybe it's like
paid
a deep
account.
research almost.
It is.
No,
It's a
no. Well,
deep
yeah, on the
research.
$20. Yeah, on the $20.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
on the
you're right.
paid account, you get deep thinking.
And then
Which
you get the
is...
Pro if you upgrade to the team. When you go to the team workspace, you can actually get GPT-5 Pro. It looks like I don't have that because I don't have a team. It's just myself, but
Yeah,
it would be
the
interesting to kind of see
$200 a month
what that is.
version also has the thinking, and it's like an unlimited version of thinking, I think is what they were saying. But I mean, we're
Gotcha.
talking about a pretty powerful engine. Like if you were doing coding, you would typically have to choose the coding style ChatGPT. So for the average user, it's a little bit daunting still. Like, which one do I
Right.
use? And in fact, I legitimately just had a conversation with a very good friend of mine over coffee 2 weeks ago, where I was telling him for a task he wanted to achieve. I said, why don't you go through? And I think I had a similar conversation with you, Dave. Go and try it and put it through this type of engine, then try the same prompt with another engine, try another one, and then see which one gives you the right result or the closest to the right result that you wanted, and then
Right.
default to that one when you want to do that task. Well, now we don't have to worry about that. It's smart enough now to go, oh, this is what you want? Yeah, I can do that, and do it accordingly. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but that's part of it. So you can still direct it and say, hey, I want you to be more precise. I want you to think a little bit deeper about this. I want you to research this a little bit more. They've made it more humanized. So the more human your communication is with it, the more it'll actually adapt and grow to suit to your requirements and needs, which is really
Yeah.
quite fun. Another big thing that I saw at this particular announcement, and I haven't gotten all the way through the video. It's over an hour long. I'm about halfway through. I was watching it while I was eating some lunch earlier. What I saw was a mention where it could actually do code generation. So you could tell it what sort of app you want. And the app that was given in the demonstration was he wanted to teach his girlfriend, who's a native English speaker, French. He wanted to do it in the form of quizzes. He wanted to do it in the form of flashcards, and he wanted to do it with this special little game that he'd come up with, which is, I think it was the cheese and the mouse or something. Now, he gave an example that just like developers, it's going to be interpreted differently by ChatGPT in different ways. So what he did is he did an experiment by opening up 3 different tabs, same instruction, hit go on each of those tabs, and have it generate what it felt the instruction was with his instruction set. And he gave a bit more of a detailed instruction set to do that. But it was all the same. Each one of those came up with a different scenario, but they were all fully coded up with hundreds of lines of code that they could hit play and run the app as a working app within ChatGPT's window.
Wow.
Which is incredible. It compiled it and ran it local. And
I mean,
it
that's crazy, and that's incredible. And now, do they still have agent mode now in ChatGPT-5? Do
Agent
they have
mode,
it?
I believe, yes, agent mode is still there. So you can still use agent mode. They've still got study mode. They've still got these other modes. And in fact, if you use your cell phone, you'll actually find that with those, you can still use those, select those types of modes. I haven't played
It must
enough with
just be,
software.
I haven't played around with it. Like, obviously, like
I think
yourself,
you
like
need
it's
to
something new
ask.
to me.
I want to use agent mode, and I think it's probably the way to bring it up
Okay,
on the
because
desktop.
before it was like a setting right here, right? That would be,
Right
you
underneath.
select agent, yeah, right underneath. That's not there anymore. It just says GPT-5. So I'm gonna have to
It's
watch, like yourself. I'm gonna have to watch this presentation, right?
You know what's, it's for me, it's weird, Dave. Like, I'm an Android user, and I used to use Nokia back in the day, and then I switched over to HTC, used their phones for a little bit with their OS, which was horrible.
Right.
And then I decided to take the plunge, and I bought a friend's old iPhone 3. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. It died. It got bricked through an update, and then I did a deal with Apple, and they upgraded me to the iPhone 4. And I used that until I kind of realized it was a little out of spec for me. And then I upgraded, and I didn't want to spend the money basically to get to an Apple. Because in Australia, we do a little bit different. You have to pay for your Apple outright. I don't think you can do that in the US. You have to be on a plan, subscribe to something to get an Apple in most cases. With your, well, in Australia, we just buy them outright and then put them on our own telco plans. So it was quite expensive. So I bought a budget-friendly Samsung Android. And the one thing that really threw me was after using the Samsung, I realized just how simple it was to use an iPhone. It was just, for me, when I tried to use an iPhone later, a couple of years later, it was just too simple for me. I was getting frustrated with it. Like, I didn't have a back button. I didn't have a, like I have
all these things you became accustomed to, right?
I just become so accustomed and used to. I think this is going to be my biggest problem as a power user to deal with and it's probably going to be yours as well. GPT-5. They've tried to make it so simple. They've made it the Apple iPhone interface for phones, where everything's just very simple, one button click, no backs, no approve. Very, very easy to use and navigate. If you're used to that sort of simplistic tech, viewpoint, for new users and non-power users, I think it's amazing. For people who are power users, it's going to take us a minute just to get our head around it. And I think once we do, we're going to really love it. But like for me, it doesn't have that. Like, I've got it up on the window up next to me at the moment. And what they're saying is you're going to have a conversation where they described you're going to be basically communicating on ChatGPT-5 or GPT-5 on the free version until you run out of credits. Then they're going to drop you down to a GPT-5 Lite or mini version, which is still in there. I think they were saying it's still equivalent to about a 3.5, some parts of 4 capability for the free version. But it was what was most interesting, and the beginning of that video, when they start talking, they were describing how to communicate. Basically, they were saying that the original version was like chatting to a teenager.
Okay.
It was kind of interesting, but it would annoy you sometimes with the answers you would get.
Yeah, I got that for sure.
Yeah. And although that's a great analogy, right? Then we went into, GPT-4, and it was more like dealing with a college grade, university level, educated individual. It was mostly accurate, mostly correct. You got a lot less annoyed in the conversation, and you got better results most of the time. They're saying, well, basically what you're dealing with is a professional now. You're dealing with someone who gets things right most of the time. They understand the nuances that you're trying to, put forward, and it's got a bit more of an understanding, and it does the thinking for you. So one thing that they did demonstrate, and I have noticed too, is when you do a deep search and it shows you how long it thought for before it decides to answer you, it demonstrates that. And one of the things it seems to have the ability to do is, as you're starting to do a search, it'll instantly, if it feels like it needs to, it'll do a deeper research on it, but it gives you the option to say quick answer. So you can shortcut it by clicking the quick answer, and it'll just give you a quick answer based on, rather than go and do all that deep research for you. So you can tell it by interacting with it still to not go so in depth. But by default, it's going to automatically try and figure out if you want to go in depth or not. So lots of really fun things to come. Like I said, it's only been out. I've only got to play with it a little bit today. I got to watch a video. One of the cool things I'm seeing is there's a whole side menu now. So there's a lot more history and source material. So you can actually see where the information's been sourced from now. A lot quicker in here. It's more interactive. The other thing I saw in the video, which I wasn't aware of previously, and maybe it's just I was ignorant to the fact, but when you create a canvas to actually, sit there and edit the documents and build stuff in, that's now resizable. So if you want to resize that and go back to the original chat, you can actually resize that, push that off to the side, and instead of having that taking up, 3/4 of the space and then 1/4 of the space for your chat, you can resize it to do 50-50 or 2/3 and 1/3 or whatever, which means you can go back to your chat and actually communicate better rather than sitting there scrolling through like a phone screen's worth of information going up, which is kind of frustrating for me.
Right.
So I'm excited to play with it more. I just wanted to share.
Well, I think it'll be a game changer for people that are using it on a regular basis. Like I said, I think understanding a couple weeks ago now, and this is showing how quickly things evolve in the AI game right now. Like a couple weeks ago, we were literally just talking about the different models and how to know when to choose which one and what you're looking for, and how you're going to get the different results out of each. And now ChatGPT, 2, 3, maybe even a month later, I don't know, comes out with a version that completely blasts that whole thing out of the water. And it doesn't matter anymore because, it's going to make the decision for you now. So you can see how quickly, and I mean, we're literally talking not even would this be November of this year will be the 3rd year that ChatGPT has been out.
Yeah.
Right. So, you're talking in under 3 years, this thing has gone from basic, historic data, right? It was trained on data from September before it launched, and you could never go live, right? You couldn't actually use it for live research on what was happening today. Now,
no browser interaction at the time.
No browser interaction, no integrations with other outside sources. To now, this thing is so super powered that it'll go out and do research for you, design an app on the spot, give you coding to code something, for your website or for anything. And it's great. Like for example, while we were sitting here, there's an Excel formula that I kept getting an error with it. I'm like, man, where is it? I just copied it, I dropped it into ChatGPT and said, GPT-5, and said, hey, fix this formula for me. And it did it in 2 seconds. It said, oh, I get what you're trying to do. You're trying to do A, B, and C. And so here's the error, and here's the fix. And I copied it, dropped it in, boom, done. And so it's one of those things, instead of you trying to spend 10, 15 minutes of your time, you can go to ChatGPT now with these simple things and say, hey, help me with this, or hey, fix this, right? And it's going to understand. That's the thing, it understands,
And like they're introduced the feature called study mode about a week ago. And that thing is incredibly cool for people who are concerned that they're going to get dumber using the platform, which is a lot of us are concerned by this. So what it does is, if you enabled the study mode, which you'd normally recommend for academics and students, etc., and you say, hey, I'm trying to learn about this, it'll actually introduce it. So rather than just giving you the answer, it'll show you how to get to the answer. It'll actually generate the questions. And if you try and say, hey, just give me the answer, well, hold on, let's work out how we got there first.
Right.
And it'll actually go through and slow down the process and explain it through with you, which is super clever and great. I was really quite impressed with that. I was playing in the settings the other day and noted that you can even go through, if you're using the voice communication part of it, which is really fun to use, you can choose up, I think there's like 12 different voices. So in your settings, you can change your voices. You can choose a different voice if you prefer to deal with a different voice. Find someone you're more comfortable to communicate with. It's really strange and incredible. But I think the one thing, just keep in mind, you shouldn't be sharing too much private information or sensitive information with the platform, because it is still a platform,
especially on the free version.
Exactly, on the free version.
The free version, anything you put in there is free game. Now, if you're on one of the paid versions, it stays within your own, but still, it is still learning, right? It's still there.
It is. This stuff learns, and like you and I learned the other day, we were going through the back end, right, and we realized that there's saved memories going back a year or more, and some of them are complete nonsense. Like they're questions we'd asked or statements we'd put in to just do a single task or work on a project for a particular client. And we were able to notice that they were there and go, oh. So we started removing some of these irrelevant things from the memory and purging them. And then suddenly we were like, oh, that weird quirk that it was doing over here by putting that wording in every time I wanted to do something that had hashtags, we'll always add that hashtag. That was because it picked up a memory saying, always use this hashtag. It's the craziest thing. So The technology is changing. You are not getting it's not like other tech software where you'd normally get a alert to say we've made these changes in the change log. It's very much, unless there's a major release, you don't hear about it. You kind of have to figure this stuff out yourself. You have to follow gurus. So as power users, there's always new things we're finding. You're so much further down the track of using agents than I am, because I don't feel like I have any use case right now for it. So I haven't started exploring it, but I had a use case for the study mode where you hadn't had it up, so you probably didn't see it. I
didn't even know it was there. Yeah.
In other platforms, like even Gemini, right? Gemini's done some cool stuff. They just introduced their deep thinking model this week, which is apparently pretty awesome. Gemini just introduced a feature where if you give it a prompt, it'll go and generate a storybook for children. But it's not just a storybook, it's an interactive storybook with illustrations, with wording, with audio playback. It's incredible. So, I mean, we're talking about potentially making, if you've got children that are not that interested in reading, but they love dinosaurs, or they love robots, or they love the moon, you can go and create a story in a book about that includes things that they like, which makes it more interactive and fun for them to want to interact and read too. So we're starting to see better use cases. And this was something that was mentioned in that video that I was watching from the ChatGPT team, is when they first introduced the platform way back 3 years ago, almost, they didn't really know how people were going to use it. They were kind of like, yeah, they had scenarios, they'd ran simulations on how it could be used and what it'd be used for, but like they didn't know that developers and coding would be so heavily used on the platform, and they didn't know where the direction was to be used and direct their attention to build it. They almost at one point indicated they actually were thinking about niching the platform down, but didn't know how to niche it down or where to niche it down. And you can imagine a platform like this that was built and then niched down to a specific use case, which we've seen a lot of those platforms popping up all over the place at the moment on AppSumo and other little, fly-by-night apps that just disappear and get advertised on our news feeds and the platforms that we use, social media platforms we use. This is like very inclusive, all in one, a little bit of everything. And for $20 a month as a Plus subscriber, I struggle to find anything else I could spend $20 a month and get as much value from. In all honesty, for me, I think it's just amazing. And even to the point where I've been taking photos of computer hardware and saying, I want you to compare this computer hardware to what I'm already running, which is here, and telling it what I've got in my computer at the moment. I want you to run a scenario based on my use case of usage. Is this an upgrade I should be doing? And then it'll go out and do all the research for me and tell me. I don't have to go out and learn about what processors are the best processors in the market anymore. And if I don't want to, I can just basically go, well, that one's not good for me. This one's not good for me. This one's not good because of this reason for me. So throwaway information, I guess, like that for me, that I'm only going to use once and then not have to make that decision again for a couple of years. Right. It's a fantastic tool for things like that. And they just made it a lot easier to get access to it. So it was a little bit intimidating for a lot of people by having to choose the type of, what ChatGPT version do I run? The amount of people I spoke to who didn't even know there was more than one version was also something which I always found shocking. But also, like when we were talking the other day, there was new versions always getting added in. So it was super confusing, even for people like us as power users, to know which versions to use to achieve what we were trying to achieve.
Right.
But yeah, get in and give it a try. Super cool.
No, absolutely. Hey, like get in there. Like that's the thing that we say all the time, right? Get out there, try it, give it a shot, learn about it, play around with it, figure out ways that it's actually going to help your business and kind of go with it. But Dwarin, it's been another great conversation. Of course, we've talked about cash flow. We talked about revenue, by client and profitability by client, and understanding that and how it can actually really begin to help you in your business. But for yourself, Dwarin, what's one takeaway for yourself that you hope somebody walks away from today's episode with?
Don't be complacent in thinking you know everything about your own business. Do a little bit of a deeper search, do a little bit of a deeper dig. And if you're not sure how to do that, get some assistance from someone who does know. I wouldn't have gone down the path I was going down if I hadn't had the conversations with you, Dave. I know that. And because if I was going to do it, I would have done it in the last 15 years, and I hadn't. Mm-hmm. So that was an eye-opener for me. So yeah, I'd say, look, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't go digging for it, you're not going to find it. Right. And this sort of platform that you're offering with Clarity is just incredible. I think everyone should definitely check it out. You know, I'm just thankful that I was able to find what I found and address my concerns. And I know that I have a plan moving forward where it's a lot easier for me to make decisions moving forward. And I mentioned I had a great week. One of the reasons I had a great week is because we just did a deal where we brought on a couple of great clients for SEO. We brought on 3 new virtual staff clients this week.
Love it.
Which is fantastic. So, I mean, that was a great week. It was a really great week for us. That sort of stuff doesn't happen all the time. And, you know, I'm not attributing everything that I've done this week with all my cash flow projections, etc., to that, because I'm very early in the stages. But it certainly made my life a lot easier to understand what that means for me and my business moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, good. You know, I'm glad you were able to figure all that out. Congrats on the new clients, all that fun stuff. That's awesome. But for me, I think kind of like yourself, when's the last time you looked at your financials? When's the last time you looked at your profitability? When's the last time you looked at your cash flow? Like when, you know, if I ask you the question, how much cash is going to be in the bank in 3, 6, 9 months? Do you know? And I think that's a big thing that a lot of small business, even medium-sized business owners don't, you know, they don't know. They're just going by the seat of their pants. They feel like they'll be there, but they don't know for sure. And if you don't know for sure, you need to know it. Whether that is with us or not, you should be doing something to project your cash flow out. But with that, we appreciate everybody kind of showing up, everybody being here every single week. We, you know, hope you got something out of it. If you did get something out of it, we ask that you share it with your network. Share it with somebody else. You know, you probably have business owners in your network. You know, we're looking to get the word out. We're looking to kind of increase viewership as well. You know, as we're doing this, it's episode 22?
22.
I think, yeah, that's crazy. So
almost half a year.
Yeah, we're almost getting there. So we're glad you're here. If you like it, give us do all the fun algorithmic stuff, like, share, comment, do all that fun stuff. And we look forward to seeing you all in the next one. So Dwarin, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Dave. Take care, everybody.